welcome back to Nails Before Films. Mr. Ping is here with me again because I'll be talking about Kung Fu Panda some more. Today, I'll be reviewing Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3, and the next video will finally be about Kung Fu Panda 4. Hopefully, you've watched my last video on the first Kung Fu Panda. If you haven't, the link for that is in the description and the top right corner now. Here are the rest of the nails I didn't finish in the last video. Same as last time, there's a surprise at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. Or just skip to the timestamp, but shame on you. For those who watched my first video, you'll probably have an idea of what the surprise is, and yes, it's what you think it is. Anyway, in the first video, I talked about how much I love the OG Kung Fu Panda. However, I can't really say the same for the sequels. I didn't like 2 that much when I first watched it, but after rewatching it last year because it was on TV, it's a lot better than I remembered. But that's not the case for 3. I rewatched that before watching 4, and it was as mid as I remembered. Right now, I think 2 is a good sequel, but still a bit weak compared to the original, and 3 is just kinda silly and messy. I actually watched 3 in the theater with my sister when it came out in 2016, and she absolutely despised it. She can't get over the pandas doing Tai Chi at the end and thinks it's the worst of the 4 films. I personally think it's still watchable, but definitely the worst in the franchise when it came out. Anyway, I'll get into that later. Let's get into Kung Fu Panda 2 first. As I mentioned before, I thought Kung Fu Panda 2 was mid when I first watched it. Maybe it was because I was comparing it too hard with the first movie, and frankly, I didn't think Kung Fu Panda needed a sequel. I vaguely remembered the plot, but never watched it again until last year when it happened to be on TV. After rewatching it, I was surprised by how good it was. While the original will always be the best, Kung Fu Panda 2 is definitely the strongest sequel. First, the film doesn't undo what Po went through in the first movie, and he has to learn a different lesson this time. We can see that from the first film to the second, he has grown close to the 5 and fully embodied his role as the Dragon Warrior. It makes sense that the next step for him would be to master inner peace. In the first movie, Po's focus is on who he wants to be, and in the sequel, he's learning about where he came from. The message in the second film is pretty good too. A lot of times we use our past experiences and trauma as excuses, saying we can't do this and that because of what happened to us before. However, at the end of the day, we can't let that determine who we want to be. In the movie, Po says the past doesn't matter, but that doesn't mean we just forget about it. That's not what Po did. He could only move forward when he finally accepted where he came from and decided not to dwell on that. And that's what matters the most. While our past could be valid reasons why we behave the way we do, we can't let ourselves be shackled by it. What we should do is acknowledge these traumas and choose to let go. Only then can we grow into the people we want to be. While the lessons Po learned throughout the 2 films are different, the emphasis is the same, and that's to focus on the present. Not that the past or the future isn't significant, but the most important thing is what we choose to do now. Besides Po, I like what they did with Tigress. It's nice to see how she softened up to Po since the first movie, and her interaction with Po throughout the film got an awe out of me. I like how they became friends and they develop her character a bit more without taking the story away from Po. We see in the first movie that she's not as cold as she seems. She cares a lot about Shifu, and that's the main reason why she wants to be the one who defeats Tai Lung. They expanded upon that in the sequel, and we can see that deep down she's someone who cares a lot about the people around her. While her character development is more subtle compared to Shifu's from the first movie, it's a nice addition to the film and doesn't interfere with the main story. Another nice addition would be Po's dad, Mr. Ping. In the last film, we didn't really get to see how he felt about his son becoming the Dragon Warrior and leaving him, and I'm happy they added that in the sequel. I already liked Ping a lot in the first movie, and the second one only made him more likable. He's such a great dad, and we can see that while he's proud of his son's achievement, he's extremely worried about him and loves him as his son, not because he's the Dragon Warrior. I teared up when Po said to him, "I'm your son," at the end of the movie. I'm just such a sucker for family. I love how Po starts out unsatisfied by just being Ping's son, believing there must be more. But by the end, he learns that what he has is already enough. While Ping serves as the comic relief most of the time, he and Po also have the most emotional scenes in the Kung Fu Panda movies. This proves that while a character can be goofy and funny, they can also be much more. A lot of the current kids' movies don't understand this, in my opinion. Most of the time, they just have one-dimensional comic relief that only serves to be funny, but it doesn't have to be that way. Besides the good guys, the villain, Lord Shane, is also a great character. He has a lot in common with Tai Lang. They both feel betrayed by their parents, and both of them fail because they can't be satisfied with what they have. But despite the two characters going through similar issues and downfall, Shane doesn't feel like Tai Lang 2.0. His upbringing is the opposite of Tai Lang, so it's interesting how they turn out to be so similar. It really shows that no matter where you come from, we all have the potential to be good or bad. Similar to Tai Lang, we can also see that Shane has some sort of potential for redemption. When speaking of his parents, we can see how being banished by them affected him. But instead of looking at what he did wrong, he blamed his parents for not loving him. That's another thing that makes a good villain, the failure and refusal to reflect on oneself. Shane even has the chance to do the right thing after Po tells him the past doesn't matter, but he refuses to listen and still chooses to continue on the wrong path, which ultimately kills him. However, I personally still like Tai Lang more, and I don't sympathize with Shane as much. That being said, he's still a great villain, and Gary Oldman voiced him perfectly, much like Ian McShane, who voiced Tai Lang in the original. Shane's design is also awesome. I love how they utilized his tail during fights, and they animated him to be both graceful and threatening. Speaking of the animation, Kung Fu Panda 2 is also well animated. I love the shadow puppetry animation they did at the beginning. The fights are mostly entertaining, but I will say that starting from Kung Fu Panda 2, the fights start to get a bit too much and they aren't as memorable anymore. There's the fight they had at the musician village, the lion dance thing, the cart fight, the tower fight, the factory fight, the boat fight. It's just a bit much, and I don't remember most of them before rewatching. While they're still very entertaining and have some cool gimmicks to make each fight unique, it's starting to become forgettable. That being said, the whole movie is still well paced and nothing feels too dragged on. While they start to add humor when they don't need to, at least they usually follow up with something serious. For example, I wasn't happy with the scars joke at the end when Shane asked Po how he found peace. That's a serious moment and we don't need a joke there. However, at least they followed it up by Po saying Shane should care about what scars do, which pulls the story back to being serious. Another example would be Shifu saying Po being chosen as the Dragon Warrior was the worst day of his life. He followed it up by saying the problem wasn't Po but within himself. Or Shifu was upset that Po mastered inner peace so quickly, but Po followed up by saying he had a great teacher. So despite having a bit too much humor, the movie is still balanced overall. The only complaints I have about Kung Fu Panda 2 are Shifu convincing the masters to help and the wolf betraying Shane scenes. While I know Shifu could be convincing, it feels a bit cheap that the two masters just joined the final fight like that without any real explanation. The same goes for the wolf refusing to fire upon their own people. It makes sense and it's nice to see how Shane's obsession pushes everyone away, but I wish they built it up throughout the movie. For example, have a few wolves in the tower when Shane brought it down so the blind guy will start to doubt his loyalty towards Shane. But these are small problems. The movie as a whole is still well written. Oh, I also don't like how they show Po's actual dad in the end. I know it's to hint at Kung Fu Panda 3, but I never really like it when movies make it obvious that there will be a sequel, but whatever, it is how it is. Kung Fu Panda 2 is still a good movie on its own and a great sequel. Sadly, I can't say the same for Kung Fu Panda 3. I think Kung Fu Panda 3 started out fine. I like that Po's new lesson is to be a teacher. It makes sense that his next step would be to grow from a student to a mentor. However, the problem is that he has to learn Qi as well, and these two don't go hand in hand. In Kung Fu Panda 2, learning about where he came from was part of the journey to master inner peace, and the two went along with each other throughout the film. However, in the third movie, they forget about Po having to learn to teach throughout half of the film, and his focus is completely on learning Qi. When he finally has to teach the pandas to do Kung Fu, he just learns that he needs to use different methods to teach different people, which is the same lesson Shifu learned in the first movie. It's really underwhelming and doesn't tie in with the whole Qi thing either. Po himself didn't learn Qi, the pandas, his dads, and Tigress did. Maybe the idea is that if Po didn't teach them Kung Fu in the first place, they wouldn't be able to use Qi to help him later. But that's not what I got when I watched the movie. I just thought, wait, they learned to use Qi just like that? It's that easy? It's really rushed and I don't like Qi at all. It feels like they just need a new gimmick, but didn't think it through. I can't help but feel like inner peace and Qi are redundant. Don't you need to know who you are to have inner peace? So if Po already mastered inner peace, shouldn't he already know who he is? The message for the third film is really weak and foreseeable too. It's just, you're not just one thing, you are everything. It's a valid lesson, but didn't resonate me as well as the previous two movies. Kung Fu Panda 3 has a serious pacing problem too. Besides Po having to learn two things, he also has to reconnect with his dad Li Shang. On top of that, they also have to introduce the new villain Kai. It's already tight to do all these things in an hour and 35 minutes, yet they spend so much time on stuff that is just funny, but doesn't do much to progress the story. The part where Po learns to be a panda is way too long, and I feel like it's mostly there for comedic effect. The focus of that part should be on Po reconnecting with his dad and being confused as to whether or not he's a panda when he doesn't act like one. Yet, they spend most of the time just being funny. To be honest, stuff like the female panda with the ribbon is not funny and just takes time away from Po's character development. I miss the first movie when they know how to write a tight story. This actually leads me to my next complaint. Kung Fu Panda 3 is really childish compared to the previous films. The story isn't as dark, the message is a bit shallow, and the humor is really immature. Remember when I said Kung Fu Panda 2 started adding humor when they didn't have to? Well, 3 is even worse. It just has to be funny even when it's not needed. For example, when Po hugged his dad after talking about his mom, do you really need to add the hugger panda? It's not funny and kind of ruins the emotional scene. And I really don't like how Shifu became the comic relief in this film. The joke of nobody knowing Kai also got old real quick. The humor just didn't land in this movie, and I honestly don't find the pandas cute. Another problem would be the villain Kai. He has the potential to be a better villain if they develop him a bit more. I like his story of being Oogway's brother in arms, and he really loved Oogway as a brother. However, I don't like how towards the end of his backstory, they resort to he's just evil and wants to take everyone's Qi. I want to know why he became that way. If he's close to Oogway, then surely he's not that bad, right? They could do something like Kai wanted to harness the power of Qi to win whatever war they were fighting, but Oogway saw the darkness and implication in taking away others' Qi and decided to stop Kai. That way, at least Kai would be somewhat sympathetic and I would understand better why he felt so betrayed by Oogway. Despite being possibly the strongest villain in the 3 movies, he's the least memorable. My sister completely forgot about him before we rewatched the movie, and his fights are forgettable too. His fight with Oogway is okay, but I can't help but feel like Oogway isn't really trying. His fight with Shifu is fine, but it's too one-sided to be interesting. While Shifu being emotional after failing to protect the Jade Palace is done decently, I honestly don't remember much else. His fight with Po is also kind of stupid. He's suddenly affected whenever his Jade minions get hit, but we've never seen that before. And I don't understand why he doesn't just absorb Po's Qi when Po's using the finger hold. Anyway, after Po takes him to the spirit realm, the flower petals are suddenly a portal now, and they could send Qi through it. It honestly feels like they just started making things up to end the story. The way Kai is defeated is underwhelming too. Po just gives him his chi and he explodes. But aren't they already dead? So is Kai still in the spirit realm, or does he just cease to exist completely? How does this work? And I feel like it would be better if Kai took the chi from Po instead of Po giving it to him. It would better prove what Oogway said in the beginning, that having more is less. Speaking of Oogway, I hate how they had to explain why he chose Po in the first movie. So the reason why he chose Po was because he knew pandas could do chi. But that kind of defeats the purpose of the first film. One of the points of the first movie is that no one knew why Oogway chose Po. He saw potential in the least likely place. So no matter who you are, what you look like, or where you come from, you have the potential if you believe in yourself. At least that's what I thought the first film tried to convey. Yet in the third movie, they threw that out of the window and Oogway had to have a specific reason for choosing Po. And it was because pandas are special and could do chi. I hate that. They should have kept the reason why Po was chosen as a mystery. It was more impactful that way, and Kung Fu Panda 3 ruined that. The only thing Kung Fu Panda 3 did really well was the scene between his two dads. I love Mr. Ping so much, and he's just such a wise character. I love what he said to Lee about having him in Po's life didn't mean less for him, just more for Po. It's really touching and a good example of what true love is. I didn't like Po's real dad, Lee Shane, that much when I first watched the movie. I thought he was really immature, and I remember him lying to Po. But watching it again, I understand why he did what he did, and he eventually grew on me. The animation is okay, the fights are decent but forgettable as I mentioned before. I like the Chinese painting style when they explain Kai's backstory, but it's not as impressive as the shadow puppetry from the last film. Overall, I don't think Kung Fu Panda 3 is terrible, but it's not good either. The story is all over the place, the characters don't get enough development, and it's too childish. And don't say, of course it's childish, it's a kids movie. It's childish compared to the previous two movies, which are kids movies too, so that's not a valid excuse. I remember after watching 3, my thought was, well, it could have been worse, but please don't make any more Kung Fu Panda movies. And guess what? They made another Kung Fu Panda, but that's for my next video. As a whole, the original trilogy is fine. While 3 is really underwhelming, at least it doesn't undo the previous films. The original will always hold a special place in my heart, and is definitely the strongest film in the franchise. And 2 is a great sequel. I feel like they really understood why the original worked and delivered a movie that told a different story while retaining what people loved about the first film. Anyway, that's my review of Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3. And here's the surprise. The nails, they glow again! The effect is a bit better this time in my opinion. I tried only putting a tiny bit of the glow-in-the-dark polish in their eyes. I'm especially happy with how Viper turned out, but Mantis looks terrible. Maybe my disdain for Seth Rogen seeped into my art. Hope you guys liked my review and my nails. I'll finally get into 4 in my next video. Until then, as always, like, subscribe, comment, share, do what you want. Keep nailing it and love Kung Fu fighting, people.